The first ever U.S.-born pope is now openly challenging the war being waged by the other most influential American on earth, President Trump. Just today, Pope Leo XIV tweeted, quote, "Those who pray are aware of their own limitations. They do not kill or threaten with death. Instead, death enslaves those who have turned their backs on the living God. Enough of the idolatry of self and money, enough of the display of power." And during a peace vigil tonight, the Pope called out, quote, "the delusion of omnipotence fueling the war." Earlier this week, he even took the extraordinary step to call on people to contact their elected leaders to advocate for peace. A Trinity College Dublin professor told MS Now the Pope's appeal to people to call their representatives are, quote, "the equivalent of the nuclear button for the Vatican." Joining us now to discuss all of this is Father Brian Massingale, professor of theological and social ethics at Fordham University. Father, it is great to have you on the show. Thank you for making time for us this evening.
Thank you for the invitation. It's good to be with you.
So why do you think this administration seems so threatened by the moral authority of Pope Leo?
I think we have to back up a little bit and understand that when Pope Leo is speaking, he's not speaking as an American. He's speaking as the Pope. And I think there's sometimes we kind of cast him in a kind of partisan light in terms of it's Pope Leo versus President Trump. No, it's Pope Leo as the representative of a faith leader, of a faith tradition that is over 2,000 years old. And he's not doing anything when the Pope is speaking. He's not doing anything that any other Pope hasn't done. So even tonight, when you're talking about the lead up to in his speech tonight at the prayer vigil, he rooted his thought in the thought of Pope John Paul II, in Pope Francis, in Pope Paul VI, in Pope Pius XII, and Pope John XXIII. So when he's speaking as a faith leader. And I think the reason why President Trump may be a little concerned by what Pope Leo is saying is because Pope Leo is basically calling out what he terms the misuse of religion, the idolatrous appropriation of religious faith to justify a war which, by every measure in the Catholic tradition, would be considered immoral and unjust.
Well, could you talk a little bit about that? What would the Catholic theological tradition say about a war of choice, and what would the teachings tell us?
I'm glad you asked that question, because Pope Leo is an Augustinian. That means he belongs to a religious order that owes its inspiration to St. Augustine, the great Christian leader of the 3rd century. And I think we have to 3rd and 4th century. I think we have to understand that St. Augustine gave us the rudiments. He was the originator of what's become known as the just war doctrine. And this doctrine is one that's taught in every military academy in the U.S. Primary about this doctrine is that the war must have a just cause. In other words, it can only be used to protect innocent lives. It also needs to be waged as a last resort. The criterion of the just war is that you don't have wars of choice. Wars of choice, by their very definition, are immoral and cannot be waged and cannot be justified. The just war doctrine also goes further then and says, even in a just war, not everything goes. And so there must be great care taken to protect civilian populations, to protect civilian infrastructure. And so by that just war doctrine, again, going back thousands of years on now, any kind of threat to annihilate an entire civilization so that it can never return again, there's no way that can be squared with any understanding of the just war doctrine. Also interesting in the Catholic Church, in the Second Vatican Council, this major assembly that took place in the early 1960s, that council made a great effort to be open and inviting to the world, and so it didn't speak in a language of condemnation. There's only one condemnation that was issued at the Second Vatican Council, and that was against this belief in a total war. A war of total annihilation. There's no way that that can be squared with the moral conscience of Catholics, but of any person of goodwill.
Father, there are some very senior members of this administration who are Catholics. I'm thinking the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, J.D. Vance, converted as an adult to Catholicism, actually has a book out right now, a new book. about his faith and how that informs his thinking. How do you think someone like J.D. Vance would be hearing the message of the Pope right now?
I don't know what J.D. Vance's mental state is, and I don't want to try to read the tea leaves of his soul. That's not my job. But I would say that when the Pope speaks, he speaks to the conscience of people. He's not appealing to people's political ideologies. He wants to raise something that's more fundamental, and that is what's going on in the American consciousness, what's going on in American society. What has happened to our politics that such a rhetoric, that such a threat can be seen as normal? These are the things that the Pope wants to raise. So he's not interjecting himself directly into a political debate. The Pope wants to do something that's far more fundamental, and that is to say, what has happened to our politics that such rhetoric can be normalized, that can be excused, or that political leaders aren't moved to a concern about this kind of rhetoric. I think that's the kind of thing that Pope Leo wants to put before us. He's not trying to interject himself into a political debate. He wants the political debate to be about how can this be normal? How can people of goodwill not be appalled by such rhetoric? It's interesting that in his remarks tonight, he says that even the holy name of God is being dragged into discourses of death. And what he wants to do is he's calling to mind what's happening now is we really see a clash of religious faiths. On the one hand, you see the administration appealing to a religious faith or a God that would sanctify or justify American aggression, American dominance, Americans' will to unbridled power, to what he called this delusion of omnipotence. Whereas Pope Leo wants to say that the true God, the living God, is, as he said tonight, a God of every people, language, and nation. In other words, he would definitely want to call upon any politician that would say that God is definitely on your side and no one else's. He would say that's idolatry. That's not a true God that most religious faiths would recognize.
Father Brian Massengale, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Well, thank you. This is a very important conversation. Thank you.